Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're going to be looking at the remaining cards that are going to be introduced within Dawn of Majesty. Like always, they tend to be when it's the last few cards, they'll just splurge them out, just give us a taste of what the final introductory cards are going to be. First card is Master Model Diploman. It's a level 5 Dark Attribute Machine type effect monster with 2000 attack and defense. First effect, if this card is tribute summoned, you can target one monster in your graveyard and one face-up monster your opponent controls. Equip that monster from the graveyard to that opponent's monster. While a monster is equipped this way, it loses attack equal to that equipped monster's. 2. Your opponent's monsters equipped with equipped cards you control cannot activate their effects. I love the design of this card. I think it's really an unusual effect, and I always love seeing these types of things, something unique, something Konami has actually thought about. I know it's a level 5 and it's a little bit more difficult to just bring it out, especially to get its effect you do need to go for the tribute summon. It's not a case of you can just special summon it, so you do have to meet that condition. But depending on what you've got in your graveyard, if you've got some beat sticks out there, 3000 attack monsters, and you can equip those to your opponent's monsters, it's really good because you can essentially zero out your opponent's attack points. The secondary ability is also useful. Being able to shut down your opponent's activated effects means they can't respond. That means you're just able to do what you want, really. The other thing is you can reverse this actually as an effect. You don't have to use the first effect to equip a monster to theirs. You can actually just equip your spell cards to your opponent's cards to trigger the secondary ability, which makes for a nice change of pace, making your opponent have maybe an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. Oh, your monster has a few hundred more attack points, but it's not able to do anything. It's just a monster. The next card is Slower Swallow. It's level 1 Wind Attribute Winged Beast effect monster with 100 attack and defense. The first effect, you can only special summon Slower Swallow with its first procedure once per turn. If there are 2 or more monsters with the same level on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2. You contribute this card to draw 2 cards instead of 1 for your normal draw during your next draw phase. I like the design of this card. It's a bit of a staggered version of Pot of Greed, so it's fine as an effect. The first effect is also fine if you've got 2 monsters with the same level. Meeting those conditions, neither of them is that difficult. And yeah, I don't have much of an opinion of it. I think it's an okay card. Do I think it's going to see that much play? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you think of Card D and how difficult that was. You could use its effect, but then you couldn't do anything for the rest of the turn. This seems to be a lot more easy to use and a lot easier to special summon to meet the conditions, but are people going to forget this card very quickly? Probably. Exoskeletal Dragon Gaiarm is a level 6 Earth Attribute Dragon Synchro effect monster. It has 2000 attack and 1300 defense. It requires a tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters, so it's generic. You can only use the first, second and third effects of this card's name once per turn each. 1. You contribute this card, then target 3 other synchro monsters in your graveyard, return them to the extra deck. 2. You can target one of your monsters special summoned from the extra deck and equip this card from your graveyard to that target. And 3. When a monster equipped with this card declares an attack, you can draw 1 card. I have got to say I love the design of this card. I think it's going to be quite useful. For starters, the first effect just to tribute itself to recover 3 of your extra deck monsters. It's a perfectly decent effect, a little bit like Pot of Avarice, but specifically for extra deck monsters. It doesn't really have any drawbacks in that regard. Yes, you do have to get rid of it, but 2000 attack points you're not going to really miss. And it's as easy as just bring out maybe a level 4 monster and a level 2, or maybe 2 level 3 monsters. So long as one of them's a tuner and one's a non-tuner, very easy to meet the condition. The secondary ability to be able to just equip to one of your monsters from the extra deck, it's fine as an effect, but it's just to trigger the third effect, which I love because it's just whenever that monster declares an attack. It doesn't have to be when the monster destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard. It doesn't have to meet any other conditions. It's just when it declares the attack. This is incredibly decent because there are fewer restrictions to it. The only downside I'd say is if your opponent just ends your battle phase or stops you from going into anything, then probably that's the only way that this card is going to see any, drawback to. Messenger Spirit of the Fatal Eye Psychopompos is a level 2 Earth attribute zombie type tuner effect monster with 0 attack and defense. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name once per turn each. 1. If this card is special summoned, you can apply this effect based on which of the following your opponent has more of in their graveyard. Monsters, banish this card, and if you do, your opponent banishes 1 monster from their graveyard. It's their choice. Or spell or trap cards, send this card to the graveyard, and if you do, your opponent sends 1 monster they control to the graveyard. Their choice. And 2. During the end phase, if this card was banished last turn, you can special summon this banished card. This is quite an unusual card from the point of view that I really don't know what to say about it. It's definitely not a card I've read about before. I know some of the newer booster packs like to have 1 or 2 unusual tuner monsters to them. Typically, the zombie types tend to be more favourable because they get splashed into so many different types of decks, and they tend to be a lot more consistent. You just think of things like Unizombie and Plague Spreader Zombie as just 2 examples of cards that even see play to this day. The first ability, it's fine. It does require it needs to be special summoned, but simply by banishing it, you can get rid of one of your opponent's monsters, or they have to send one of their monsters to the graveyard. That's fine. But again, it's their choice, so they're obviously going to get rid of their weakest card, whether that's on the field. If you choose spell or traps, whether, it's a monster from their graveyard, they're going to choose something weak that they're not going to really need. The secondary ability is quite decent because it's like a reoccurring effect. When it's banished, you just get to special summon it again, so you'll continue being able to trigger this effect, and it's nice that it's not a once per duel effect, as I don't think it needs to be. Margin Trade is a normal spell card with the effect you can only activate 1 card with this card's name per turn. 1. Your opponent can discard 1 card to negate this effect, otherwise both players look at their opponent's deck, and if they do, they choose 1 card from it. Then they add the card chosen by their opponent to their hand. I think this is a little bit of a strange one. It's just really bizarre. You're choosing your opponent's card, but they're choosing yours. They're probably going to choose something quite weak. I would say the nice thing is you get to spy on what your opponent's deck is like, so you get that information, but then your opponent does as well. Depending on who has the more knowledge, the more understanding of how your opponent's deck plays, is going to be the one who's going to be at the greatest advantage. It does let your opponent negate this effect by discarding a card. I don't understand why they'd want to do that, unless they're really concerned you're going to see a hidden strategy, such as something like Gren Margidaiza, which can OTK. Other than that, I wouldn't see any relevance in doing that. Monster Assortment or Assorted Monsters is a normal trap card with the effect you can only activate 1 card with this card's name per turn. 1. Reveal 1 normal monster and 1 effect monster with the same type, attribute and level from your deck, and if you do, your opponent randomly picks 1 for you to add to your hand. Also, you shuffle the other monster back into the deck. Again, I'm very confused about why this is actually good, or how this could ever be good. Yeah, it's really bizarre, because your opponent is going to go for the normal monster, they're not going to go for the effect, unless the effect monster happened to have a negative effect to it, in which case, why would you do that in the first place? It's fine if you need to run specific cards, or you're searching for specific things that happen to have both normal type monsters and effect monsters in them. I think there are quite a few themed cards within archetypes in Dawn of Majesty that actually rely on things like this, so probably in one of those it can be decent, but in most other decks it's going to be very easily forgotten about. As the Master of Beasts Pleases is a continuous trap card with the effect you can only activate the effect of this card's name once per chain. 1 once per turn at the start of the damage step. If your monster battles an opponent's monster in the same column, you can return all cards in your battling monster's column to the hand. Whilst this is a decent enough effect depending on what your opponent has in that column, is it going to be worthwhile running? No. Most column-based cards don't see any type of play, except for those. I think the Mech Lords get some support from that. I think those are decent, but any of the other cards definitely are easily forgotten. Paparazzi Disparazzi is a Link 2 Dark Attribute Fiend type Link effect monster with 100 attack. The links point to the left and to the right, and it requires 2 effect monsters for its materials. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name once per turn. 1. When your other monster is targeted for an attack, you can change the attack target to this card and perform damage calculation. 2. When this card you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster, destroy that opponent's monster, and if you do, gain life points equal to half the attack it had on the field. So this card just lets you redirect any attacks your opponent have from one of your monsters onto this card, and then it punishes your opponent by destroying that monster, as well as giving you half your life points back. Whilst that's an okay effect, is it going to be that groundbreaking? No, it's not. It's fine, but there are so many other Link monsters you can run, and definitely out of them, this is not something I would consider running. It's interesting that they've got some camera-based cards. I know there's a couple of other cards. There's a number monster, Force Focus, which is I think it's number 25, which is a camera, and I think there's a couple of other ones that are as well. Nice to see some changes to the way they do the artworks, but I think this is just going to be a character collector card rather than anything that's going to be game or ground shattering. Stall Turn is a counter trap card with the effect: when a spell or trap card or a monster effect is activated that would negate the summon of a monster or the activation of a spell or trap card, you can banish the top 3 cards of your deck face down, negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle that card into the deck. I compare this a little bit to something like Wire Tap Trap card, which was introduced within Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. It basically had the same effect where it would reshuffle your opponent's trap card back into their deck, but it would be face up, so it would put it in a situation where you couldn't activate any of those cards until you redrew into that card. That's a decent enough effect, and this does similar, but the problem I've got is that it banishes the top 3 cards of your deck face down. If any of those cards are particularly useful, you've lost them. Most cards that are banished face down are very difficult to actually recover. I think there's only like 1 or 2 cards currently in the game that let you recover cards that are banished face down, and there's a reason for that. And originally, the removal and / banish mechanic was used as a means of making it impossible for your opponent to, or for yourself to recover cards. But then again, there are cards such as Return from a Different Dimension that made this very powerful, cards which are still banned even to this day. And so by using this as an alternative to that banishing mechanic is the new version of stopping you and your opponent from recovering those cards. Definitely something I'd consider, but would I use it necessarily all the time? For certain decks, no. It's a counter trap card, so it's really fast. It's spell speed 1, but definitely be advised there are better cards out there. And the final card is Jar of Generosity. This is a normal trap card with the effect: place 1 card from your hand on the top or bottom of the deck. Really disappointed with this card. You do have a few cards out there. Every so often they like to release different jar cards, different pot cards. Some of them are quite decent. They do have really good effects. They can recover things, or they let you draw into additional cards and go into your resources. But there are other ones such as Pot of Generosity, which is similar to this but in a spell card, which are just absolute trash. This is one of those trash cards. It lets you either set a card from your hand to top deck, so you're drawing it your next turn, or put it on the bottom of your deck in hope that, you're not actually getting any benefit from this. This is a minus at all costs. There is no worth in running this card. It's just so wasteful, and it's definitely not going to have a decent price to it.